When I was just 8 years old, my parents decided to spend the weekend at our old cabin in the woods. It was a place we often visited in the summer to enjoy nature, breathe fresh air, and simply escape the hustle and bustle of the city. The summer day promised to be wonderful, and my father and I were loading the car while my mother was carefully packing everything we needed for the picnic. I, small and full of life, couldn't take my eyes off the tall trees, the dense green forests, and the bright sun that accompanied us throughout the trip. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, covering us under its green canopy. The journey to the cabin was long, but I enjoyed every minute of it. I watched out the window, marveling at the scenery. The tall trees seemed to reach the sky, their crowns intertwining to create intricate patterns. The birdsong accompanied us along the way, their voices weaving into melodies that seemed part of the forest world. I felt like a little explorer embarking on a great adventure. When we finally arrived at the cabin, the sun was already setting. My father immediately set to work on the barbecue outside while my mother and I prepared the rest in the kitchen. The cabin was old but cozy, with a distinctive smell of wood and memories of many family weekends. There was something magical about it, something that made each visit special. We enjoyed the food outdoors, laughing and sharing stories. It was a perfect time when it seemed like nothing bad could happen. After dinner, we decided to tidy up to make ourselves more comfortable. The cabin was dusty and needed cleaning, but we all worked together, turning it into a fun activity. We wiped down the old furniture, swept the floors, and put things in their places. Time flew by, and we didn't notice how evening gradually turned into night. The forest around our cabin began to make strange sounds I hadn't noticed before. But we paid no attention to it and continued with our tasks. However, fatigue took over and we decided to go to bed. My parents wished me good night, and I went to my small room. Lying in bed, I felt cozy and safe, but something was bothering me. It was as if the shadows of the forest had entered the house and settled in its corners. I tried to dismiss these thoughts, assuring myself it was just my imagination. I lay in my small bed, snugly wrapped in my blanket, and almost immediately heard a knock on the window. It wasn't a usual sound, but something strange, like someone or something trying to get my attention. Propping myself up on my elbow, I cautiously looked outside, but there was no one there. The night was dark, and I could only see the silhouettes of trees shimmering in the moonlight. My heart beat faster, but I decided it was just a play of light and shadow. Nevertheless, the anxiety didn't leave me. I rushed to my parents, but they said it was probably just my imagination. My mother hugged me and assured me that everything was fine, while my father said that sometimes night sounds could seem scary, but they were just sounds of nature. I went back and tried to sleep, but the anxiety didn't leave me. I tossed and turned in bed, listening to every sound, trying to convince myself nothing bad would happen. I woke up to the deafening sound of breaking glass and my parents' screams. My heart pounded in my chest, and I froze for a moment, not understanding what was happening. But something inside me made me get up and go to their room. Fear enveloped me, but I knew I had to find out what had happened. My room seemed infinitely far from theirs, every step echoing in the silence of the night. Opening the door, I saw darkness and smelled something strange, the smell of blood. The smell was thick and metallic. It permeated the air, making it heavy. With trembling hands, I found the switch and turned on the light. What I saw still haunts me in my nightmares. The room was drenched in blood, and in the center stood a monster. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, its face and hands covered in blood. It was thin, but there was an incredible strength and cruelty in its appearance. I stood paralyzed with horror, unable to move. The monster turned its head and looked at me. Its eyes weren't just evil, they held an ancient hatred, something inhuman and terrifying. I couldn't look away, as if it was hypnotizing me. Seeing me, it easily grabbed my parents' bodies and disappeared into the night. It happened so quickly that I barely had time to realize what had happened. I screamed, but no one heard me. My scream echoed through the house, but the forest muffled it, swallowed it, as if it was part of this horror itself. When the police arrived, they didn't believe a word I said. In their opinion, we were attacked by a maniac, and my memories were just a product of a child's imagination. They searched the entire forest but found nothing. No traces, no clues, nothing that could confirm my words. But I remember the eyes of that monster, its bloody hands, and the horror I felt that night. Now I live in fear, afraid of the night and the shadows that hide within it. That forest and that cabin became a symbol of the horror I cannot forget. Every time I close my eyes, I see that scene, the blood, the screams, the monster's eyes. After that night, my life changed forever. We never returned to that cabin. It stood abandoned, a silent witness to the horror that happened there. Sometimes I think it waits for the moment when someone will cross its threshold again, and then the darkness will rise again. I couldn't sleep peacefully for a long time. At night I heard sounds, rustles, creaks, knocks that seemed to me the ghosts of the past. Every time I closed my eyes, that scene appeared before me: blood, screams, the monster's eyes. I tried to convince myself it was just nightmares, but they were too real. The psychologists I was taken to tried to explain it as childhood trauma, stress. They said my mind created this image to cope with the horror of that night. But I knew the truth. That monster was real. It existed, and it took my parents. I tried to find answers. I read books about the paranormal, searched for stories about similar creatures. But I found nothing. It was something that went beyond ordinary understanding, something ancient and sinister that hides in the shadows of our world. Time passed, but the fear didn't go away. I grew up, but that child who saw the monster lived inside me. Every night was a trial, every noise brought back memories of that night. I learned to live with this fear, but never managed to overcome it. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, I hear a knock on the window. At first I thought it was just the wind or a random noise. But every time this knock returned, reminding me of that night, I no longer approached the window. I knew there would be no one there. Or maybe, just maybe, there would be someone. I learned to live with this fear, but never managed to overcome it. Every day was a struggle for a normal life. I tried to be strong, tried not to show my fear. But inside I was always that little boy who stood before the monster in that blood-soaked room.